3,412 days. That's how long Michael Connor spent as a Navy SEAL before he traded his tactical gear for a farmer's hat, building a thriving organic farm stand in Riverdale Valley, Idaho. When the Russian Mafia's enforcers pulled up in their black SUVs, they saw what everyone else saw, just another peaceful farmer selling heirloom tomatoes and fresh honey, another small business to squeeze, another territory to claim. They should have noticed how he positioned his produce stands for optimal sightlines, caught how he mentally mapped every customer's movement, spotted the way his calloused hands still carried the strength of a man who could eliminate hostiles in complete darkness. Their mistake wasn't trying to extort his farm stand. Their mistake wasn't even threatening the local farmers who depended on him. Their mistake was forcing a former SEAL Team 6 operator who led classified missions across 47 countries to reach for his phone and make one call. In Riverdale Valley, some fights aren't won by those with the most muscle, but by those who've spent 15 years learning to neutralize threats before they even realize they're in the kill zone. Greater than. Dawn painted the Riverdale Valley in shades of amber and gold as Michael Connor checked the moisture content of his soil with practiced efficiency. His calloused hands moved through the earth with the same precision he once used to maintain his weapons, testing, analyzing, making micro-adjustments that could mean the difference between success and failure. 20 feet away, his border collie Mac raised his head, ears twitching toward the distant road. "I hear it too, boy," Mike murmured, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent years learning to read the smallest signs of approaching danger. The delivery truck was early today, off schedule by 12 minutes. In his former life, such a deviation would have triggered immediate tactical response. Now it just meant Sarah Chen's organic honey would arrive in time for the morning rush. The farm stand sat at the intersection of Old Mill Road and River Creek Way, a modest wooden structure that had become the heart of local commerce. Rows of fresh produce gleamed in the morning light, heirloom tomatoes arranged by ripeness, sweet corn stacked in perfect rows, herbs bundled with precise uniformity. To casual observers, it was just another quaint rural business. They didn't notice how the stand's position offered clear sightlines in all directions, or how the seemingly random placement of vintage farm equipment created natural defensive positions. "Morning, Mr. Connor," called Chen's teenage son Tommy as he helped unload honey jars from the truck. "Mom says the bees were extra productive this week." Mike smiled, noting how the boy's footsteps naturally avoided the creaky floorboards, a habit picked up from watching Mike's own careful movements. "Tell your mother it's perfect timing. Saturday crowd will clean us out by noon." The morning air carried the sweet scent of ripening strawberries from the fields behind the stand. Mike had planted them in neat rows that, to the untrained eye, appeared purely agricultural. But like everything else about River Creek Farm, their placement served dual purposes. The raised beds provided cover, the irrigation systems could become obstacles, and the seemingly decorative trellises were anchored deeply enough to stop a vehicle. The first customers began arriving as the sun climbed higher. Elderly Mrs. Patterson examining each tomato with careful deliberation. The Jensen twins racing to pick out the sweetest corn while their mother chatted about local gossip. Sheriff Davies stopping by for his weekly produce run, their conversation carrying subtle undertones of shared vigilance. "Busy weekend ahead," Davies mentioned casually, selecting bell peppers. "Lots of out-of-town traffic expected." Mike nodded, reading the unspoken message. "Good for business," he replied, "though sometimes new customers need extra attention to learn our ways." None of the regular customers knew about the 3 combat knives hidden within arm's reach, or the sat phone secured in the office, or the go bag buried beneath sacks of fertilizer. They didn't need to know. Mike had chosen this life precisely because it let him protect something worth protecting without the weight of violence hanging over every moment. Mac's low growl drew Mike's attention to a black SUV rolling past, its tinted windows and city plates marking it as out of place. The dog's reaction confirmed what Mike's instincts had already registered. The vehicle had passed by 3 times in the last hour, each time slowing slightly near the stand's entrance. Mike continued arranging bell peppers, his movements unhurried, even as his mind calculated angles, distances, potential scenarios. The peaceful life he'd built here meant everything to him. But peace, he'd learned long ago, sometimes needed to be guarded by those who remembered how fragile it could be. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Mrs. Patterson commented, selecting her tomatoes. "That it is, ma'am," Mike replied, his smile genuine, even as his eyes tracked the SUV's 4th pass. "That it is." Inside the stand's small office, a framed photograph sat partially hidden behind inventory lists and supplier contacts. It showed 6 men in desert combat gear, faces weathered but proud, arms around each other's shoulders. Mike rarely looked at it directly, but he always knew it was there, just like he knew the satellite phone in his desk drawer would still connect him to each of those men, no matter how many years had passed. He prayed he'd never need to make that call, but the photo stayed where it was, a reminder that some bonds never broke and some skills never faded. Greater than. The black SUV made its 5th pass just as Mike finished restocking the tomato display. This time, it stopped. The way the vehicle parked, angled for quick exit, engine still running, told Mike everything he needed to know about its occupants. 2 men emerged, their movements carrying the unmistakable rhythm of professional operators. The first, tall and broad-shouldered, wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the bulge of a shoulder holster. The second, shorter but more muscular, positioned himself casually by the SUV's hood, his stance giving him clear sightlines in all directions. Mac's growl deepened, but Mike gave the subtle hand signal for the dog to stay back. Mrs. Patterson was still examining strawberries, and the Jensen twins were helping their mother load corn into their truck. Just another peaceful morning at River Creek Farm Stand. Mike wanted to keep it that way. "Beautiful operation you have here," the tall man said, his accent carrying traces of Eastern European refinement layered over American education. Very traditional. His eyes scanned the stand with the same tactical precision Mike had once used to assess compound security in hostile territory. "I'm Dmitry Volkov. My associates and I represent certain business interests in the region." Mike continued arranging produce, his movements calm and deliberate. "Welcome to River Creek Farm. Tomatoes are particularly good today." He noted how the second man had drifted to cover the stand's rear exit, how both visitors maintained professional spacing for optimal coverage. "We're not here for produce, Mr. Connor." Dmitry smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Though I must say your background makes this career choice intriguing. From SEAL Team 6 to selling organic vegetables? Quite the transition." The moment hung there, heavy with unspoken threat. Mrs. Patterson glanced up nervously, sensing the tension. Mike gave her a reassuring nod, the same kind he'd once used to calm civilians in conflict zones. "Ma'am, why don't you take those strawberries home? On the house today." Once she'd hurried away, Mike turned his full attention to the visitors. His stance remained relaxed, but any professional operator would recognize the subtle shift in his balance, the way his hands stayed loose and ready. "My background isn't relevant to selling tomatoes." On the contrary, Dmitry's voice hardened slightly. "It's very relevant to our discussion. Small farms like yours, they're vulnerable. Equipment breaks, accidents happen. Our organization offers protection, ensures smooth operations. For a reasonable fee, of course." Mike met Dmitry's gaze steadily. 15 years of combat experience told him these weren't ordinary thugs. Their tactical awareness, their professional demeanor, the way they'd researched his background, This was a sophisticated operation. "Not interested," Mike replied simply. "Plenty of other businesses in town might need your services." "You misunderstand." Dmitri gestured expansively at the farm stand. "This isn't an offer. The territory has been allocated. The terms are non-negotiable. We'll return tomorrow to discuss specifics." His smile returned, cold and professional. "Do consider carefully, Mr. Connor. Your military experience should help you appreciate the tactical realities of your situation." They departed with practiced efficiency, the SUV pulling away smoothly. Mike watched them go, noting their route, their driving pattern, every detail that might matter later. Mac came to stand beside him, the dog's posture still alert. "I know, boy," Mike said quietly. "I saw it too." The way they moved, their level of preparation, the implied connections to larger organizations. This wasn't a simple shakedown. This was the beginning of something bigger. Something that threatened not just his farm stand, but the entire community. Inside the office, that old photograph seemed to watch him. 6 men, bonded by combat and brotherhood, ready to answer a call he'd hoped never to make. Mike checked his watch, calculating time zones, remembering who would be where. Not yet, he decided, but soon. Because some threats couldn't be handled alone, and some bonds were forged specifically for moments like this. The rest of the morning passed quietly, but Mike knew things had changed. In his former life, he'd learned that peace wasn't just the absence of conflict, it was the willingness to defend what mattered, no matter the cost. He'd built something good here, something worth protecting. If the Russian Mafia thought they'd found an easy target, they were about to learn why SEAL Team 6 operators never really retired. They just found different battles to fight. Greater than. Mike's 1978 Ford pickup rattled down Old Mill Road as afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley. Mac sat alert in the passenger seat, the border collie's eyes scanning the countryside with the same vigilance as his master. They were checking on Sarah Chen's honey farm first, then the Thompson Dairy, making a circuit of local suppliers who'd helped build River Creek Farm Stand into what it was. But today's visits carried a different weight. The Chen family's driveway showed fresh tire tracks, expensive tires, wider than local farm vehicles. Sarah was working her hives when Mike pulled up, her white beekeeper suit bright against the golden fields. Her shoulders tensed at the sound of his truck, relaxing only when she recognized the familiar rattle of its engine. "They came this morning," she said without preamble, removing her protective hood. Her voice carried the same quiet strength that had helped her rebuild after losing her husband 3 years ago. 2 men, expensive suits, said they were offering market coordination services for local producers. Mike examined the tire tracks while she talked, noting their depth, their turning radius. Professional drivers, maintaining tactical spacing even during a simple farm visit. What else? Said they'd help handle distribution, pricing, quality control. Sarah's hands tightened on her hood. Made it clear refusing wasn't an option. Mike, they knew about Tommy's college applications, mentioned how accidents could affect his scholarship chances. The implied threat hung in the afternoon air like smoke. Mike had seen this pattern before, not just in combat, but in the civilian operations he'd studied during his SEAL days. Start with the vulnerable points, establish dominance through fear, then systematically take control of an area's resources. The Thompsons too, Sarah continued, and the Hendersons' vegetable farm. They're hitting everyone who supplies your stand. She met his eyes steadily. "This isn't random, is it? They're targeting you specifically." "No," Mike admitted. "It's not random." He thought about the photo in his office, about the satellite phone he hadn't used in 3 years. "Did you notice anything about their vehicle, their movements?" Sarah Chen hadn't survived running a farm alone without developing her own kind of tactical awareness. Black SUV, diplomatic plates. They moved like military, reminded me of how you move sometimes, the way you're always aware of exits, angles, threats. At the Thompson Dairy, the story was the same. Then the Henderson place. Each visit revealed another piece of the pattern. The Russian Mafia wasn't just moving into the area, they were executing a carefully planned operation, using his farm stand's supply network to map the community's economic connections. Back in his truck, Mike put together the pieces. His background, their professional approach, the systematic targeting. This went beyond ordinary organized crime. These were sophisticated operators with military training and international connections. They hadn't chosen River Creek Farm stand by accident. "They're coming back tomorrow," Old Man Thompson had said, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he gripped his shotgun. "Said they'd show us what happens to farms that don't cooperate." The valley stretched out before Mike as he drove home, late afternoon sun painting the fields in shades of gold and shadow. This land, these people, they'd given him a home when he'd needed one most, helped him build something that mattered. Now they were being threatened because of him. Mac's low growl drew his attention to a black SUV parked on a distant ridge, watching. They weren't even trying to hide their surveillance anymore. That meant tomorrow would bring more than just threats. Mike's hand touched his chest, feeling the familiar shape of his dog tags still hanging beneath his shirt. He'd left that life behind, traded violence for peace, but as he'd learned in combat, sometimes protecting peace meant being ready for war. The satellite phone seemed to weigh heavier in his thoughts with each passing mile. Not yet, he told himself. But soon. Because if the Russian Mafia thought they could threaten this community with impunity, they were about to learn why some men earned their way onto SEAL Team 6 in the first place. Greater than. The memories hit Mike that night as he secured the farm stand, each shadow bringing back flashes of a mission he'd tried to forget. Vladivostok, 2019. The operation that first put him on the Russian Mafia's radar, though he hadn't known it then. His hands moved through the familiar routine of checking locks, while his mind drifted back to that rain-soaked night on the Russian coast. 6 men moving through darkness, tracking a weapons shipment that officially didn't exist. The intel had said it was a simple arms deal. Instead, they'd stumbled onto something bigger, a network of former Russian Special Forces operators building a criminal empire using military precision and political connections. "You're thinking about Vladivostok." The voice came from the darkness, making Mike spin, combat instincts surging. Sheriff Davies stepped into the light, hands raised slightly. "Easy, Mike. Saw your truck here late, thought I'd check in." Mike forced his muscles to relax, but the memories kept coming. The firefight in the warehouse, the documents they'd discovered, the faces in the photographs, faces he now recognized. Dmitry Volkov was there, he said quietly. Not in the warehouse, but in the files. He was running their American expansion even then. Davies leaned against the farm stand's counter, his posture casual but his eyes alert. "These aren't ordinary criminals, are they?" "No." Mike secured the last lock, memories overlaying present reality. "They're Zaslan, elite Russian operators who went private after the Cold War. They don't just run criminal operations, they build infrastructure, take over territories using military strategy. Vladivostok was supposed to be a weapons bust. Instead, we uncovered their whole methodology." The mission details flooded back, how they'd found manifests showing systematic takeover of local businesses. Protection rackets evolved into economic control, military tactics applied to civilian targets. His team had stopped that operation, but clearly Zaslan had simply shifted focus. 6 men went into that warehouse, Mike continued, the words coming faster now. "We thought we were facing ordinary arms dealers. Instead, we met professional operators. The fight lasted 12 minutes, lost 2 good men before we realized what we were up against." Mac's warning growl cut through the memories. Headlights swept past on the distant road, another black SUV conducting surveillance. Davies watched it pass, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. "They're watching," Mike noted. "Same pattern as Vladivostok. Reconnaissance, intimidation, then systematic takeover. Only this time, they're not smuggling weapons. They're targeting food distribution, starting with my supply network." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Because you're not just a farmer, Mike. You're the hub connecting most local producers. Control your farm stand." "Control the region's food supply," Mike finished. "Standard military strategy. Secure essential resources first. Make the civilian population dependent." His voice hardened. "That's why they chose my operation. They know my background probably traced me from Vladivostok. This isn't just business for them anymore. It's personal." More memories surfaced. The face of his team leader, bleeding out in that warehouse. The documents showing Zaslan's global expansion plans. The realization that they'd stumbled onto something far bigger than a weapons deal. "I made a promise after that mission," Mike said quietly. "No more violence, no more combat. Build something peaceful instead." He looked out over his darkened fields, remembering why he'd chosen this life. "But I made another promise too, to protect what matters, no matter the cost." Davies studied him for a long moment. "You're thinking about calling them, aren't you? Your old team?" Mike's hand moved unconsciously toward his chest, feeling the dog tags that still hung there. 3 men survived that warehouse in Vladivostok. 3 men who know exactly what Zaslan is capable of, what they'll do to this community if we don't stop them. The sheriff straightened, his decision made. "Well, you've got my support, whatever you decide. But Mike?" He gestured toward the valley. "This isn't just your fight anymore. These are our homes they're threatening, our families." Another black SUV passed, slower this time. Mike watched it disappear into the darkness, remembering the sound of gunfire in a Vladivostok warehouse. He'd tried to leave that life behind, but sometimes the past doesn't just haunt you. Sometimes it comes looking for a rematch. Greater than. Saturday morning farmers' market in Riverdale Valley had always been a celebration of community. Colorful stands lined Main Street, local farmers proudly displaying their harvest while families browsed with canvas bags and children chased each other between stalls. But today, the atmosphere carried an undercurrent of tension that Mike felt the moment he parked his truck. Sarah Chen's honey stand was empty. The Thompson Dairy's usual spot sat vacant, 3 more regular vendors missing. The remaining farmers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously at every passing vehicle. Mike's military instincts registered each detail, the modified patterns of movement, the subtle signs of fear, the way people unconsciously clustered for protection. "They visited everyone last night," Martha Henderson whispered, as Mike checked her vegetable display. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged bell peppers. "Same message. Either sign their protection contracts today or face consequences." Half the vendors were too scared to show up. A black SUV cruised past the market entrance, windows tinted dark against the morning sun. Mike counted 4 more identical vehicles parked strategically around the perimeter. Professional surveillance pattern, military-grade communication equipment visible through windshields. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. "Mr. Connor." Dmitry Volkov's voice carried across the market square, making several vendors flinch. He approached with 4 men flanking him, their expensive suits failing to hide their tactical positioning. "Beautiful morning for business, isn't it?" The crowd parted around them instinctively. Mac growled low beside Mike's leg but held position. Mike continued arranging his produce display, movements calm and deliberate. "Thought you weren't interested in vegetables, Mr. Volkov." "On the contrary," Dmitry smiled coldly, picking up a tomato. "I'm very interested in the economics of local agriculture. Did you know your little farm stand connects to nearly 60% of the region's food production? Quite the strategic position you've built." One of Dmitry's men moved to block Martha Henderson's attempt to leave her stall. Another positioned himself near the market's exit, professional operators executing practiced intimidation tactics. "You're frightening my customers," Mike said quietly, but his voice carried the same tone he'd once used to warn hostiles before combat engagement. "Frightening? No, no." Dimitri's accent thickened slightly with mock concern. "We're creating order, structure. Your military background should help you appreciate the tactical necessity of resource control." He leaned closer, dropping his voice. "Vladivostok taught us that lesson well, didn't it?" The market had gone silent, every vendor, every customer watching the confrontation unfold. Mike felt the weight of their fear, their uncertainty. These were good people, peaceful people. They didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of an old military vendetta. "Last chance, Mr. Connor." Dimitri placed the tomato back with exaggerated care. "Sign our management contract. Convince your suppliers to do the same, or tomorrow's market might experience some unfortunate quality control issues." Mike met his gaze steadily. "You're making a mistake." "No." Dimitri's smile vanished. "The mistake was made in a Vladivostok warehouse when your team interfered with Zaslan operations. Today is simply market correction." They departed with practiced efficiency, their SUVs pulling away in coordinated sequence. The market slowly came back to life, but the damage was done. Mike could see it in the vendors' faces, the growing realization that their peaceful community had become a battlefield. His hand touched the satellite phone in his pocket. The time for waiting was over. Because Dimitri had made one critical error, he'd threatened not just Mike's operation, but the entire community that had given him a home. Some men might have left their combat skills behind, might have chosen peace over violence. But a SEAL Team 6 operator never forgot how to protect what mattered. Tonight, Mike would make a call. And tomorrow, Dmitri Volkov would learn why some enemies are better left unprovoked. Greater than. Night settled over River Creek Farm like a tactical blanket, the kind Mike had once used for covert operations. Mac patrolled the perimeter while Mike sat in his office, the satellite phone heavy in his hands. The photograph on his wall seemed to watch him, 6 men bound by combat and brotherhood. 3 had survived Vladivostok, 3 still carried the weight of that mission. His fingers moved across the keypad, muscle memory dialing a number he hadn't used in 3 years. 2 rings. 3. Then a voice that immediately transported him back to countless combat operations. "Marcus Hayes." The voice was guarded, professional. "Bit late for a social call, brother." "It's Connor." Mike's throat felt dry. "Remember that warehouse in Vladivostok? Our Russian friends just showed up at my farm stand." Silence crackled across the satellite connection. Then, "Zaslon?" Hayes's tone shifted instantly from casual to tactical. Dmitri Volkov himself. "They're using my supply network to take control of the region's food distribution. Military precision, professional operators. Just like Vladivostok, but this time they're targeting civilians." More silence. Mike could almost hear Hayes processing the tactical implications. "Jack and Derek are both within 12 hours' drive," Hayes said finally. "I can be there in 18. You sure about this, Mike? You said you were done with that life." Through the window, Mike watched another black SUV cruise past his property. "They threatened my community, Marcus. Local farmers, families." His voice hardened. "Some things are worth fighting for." "Damn right they are." Hayes's response carried the immediate conviction of a man who'd spent years defending what mattered. "What's your situation?" Mike detailed the threats, the surveillance, the systematic targeting of his suppliers, professional to professional, soldier to soldier. "They're moving fast," he concluded. "Full takeover planned within days." "Not anymore." Hayes's voice carried the familiar tone of a SEAL team leader preparing for action. "Jack's been working corporate security. He'll have intel on their legitimate businesses. Derek's got contacts in federal law enforcement. I've still got connections in naval intelligence." "Marcus." Mike hesitated. This isn't a sanctioned operation, no official support. Just us against professional operators with serious backing. Hayes's laugh carried across the connection. When were our best operations ever sanctioned? Remember Manila? Bosnia? His voice turned serious. We survived Vladivostok for a reason, brother. Some enemies need to learn that not all warriors wear uniforms. Movement caught Mike's eye. Mac had spotted something. Another SUV, but different position this time. They're changing surveillance patterns, he reported, getting ready for something big. Hold position, Hayes commanded, falling naturally back into team leader mode. Maintain normal routine. Let them think they've got you intimidated. We'll approach from multiple vectors, establish cover stories for being in the area. Mike felt the familiar calm of pre-mission focus settling over him. Rules of engagement? Protect civilians at all costs. Minimize collateral damage. But Mike? Hayes's voice carried deadly certainty. These bastards threatened American soil, American families. Show them why that's a terminal mistake. The call ended with quick confirmations of contact protocols and emergency procedures. Mike sat in the darkness, feeling the weight of the decision he'd just made. 3 years of peaceful farming, ending with one phone call. But as he watched another SUV pass his farm, he knew it was the right choice. "They're coming, boy," he told Mac, who sat alert beside him. The dog's posture reflected his own growing readiness, peaceful until threatened, but lethal when necessary. Because Mike Connor hadn't spent 15 years in SEAL Team 6 just learning how to kill. He'd learned how to protect what mattered, no matter the cost. Tomorrow, Dmitry Volkov would learn the difference between threatening regular farmers and provoking men who'd spent their lives perfecting the art of irregular warfare. Greater than. Dawn hadn't yet touched the valley when the first team member arrived. Jack Reynolds walked into River Creek Farm Stand like any other early customer. Baseball cap, pulled low, worn Carhartt jacket fitting perfectly with the local crowd. Only Mike recognized the practiced sweep of his eyes, the way he noted exits, angles, threats. "Nice setup," Jack said quietly, examining a display of organic apples. "Good sightlines, multiple escape routes. You always did think tactically." His casual movements masked the fact that he was conducting a professional security assessment. "Corporate security treating you well?" Mike asked, continuing to stock shelves while they talked. Through the window, he spotted another black SUV making its morning surveillance pass. "Pays the bills." Jack's hand brushed briefly against his jacket, indicating concealed equipment. "Brought some toys from work. Derek's 2 hours out, coming in from the north. Marcus hits town by noon." The Russian surveillance teams wouldn't notice anything unusual, just another farmer chatting with a customer about produce prices. But beneath the casual conversation, 2 professional operators were exchanging critical intelligence. "They hit Thompson's dairy last night," Mike reported. "Damaged equipment. Killed 2 cows, making sure everyone knows they're serious." Jack's expression hardened. "Still using fear as a tactical weapon, just like Vladivostok." He selected an apple, his voice dropping lower. "Got into their corporate records, shell companies, political connections, legitimate business fronts. This isn't just a local operation. They're building infrastructure for something bigger." The morning sun was just cresting the hills when Derek Martinez's dusty pickup pulled into the lot. He moved like a tired trucker stopping for coffee, but Mike noted the subtle bulge of body armor beneath his flannel shirt. 15 years of federal law enforcement hadn't dulled his operator's edge. "Place looks good, Mike," Derek said, joining them by the Apple display. "Real good." His eyes tracked the latest surveillance pass. "Though your neighbors could use better taste in vehicles. Lot of black SUVs around here?" The 3 men maintained their casual poses while sharing tactical updates. Derek had official surveillance photos showing Zaslan's movement patterns. Jack had corporate documents revealing their legitimate operations. Mike detailed the local situation: threatened farmers, compromised supply lines, growing community fear. Marcus called, Derek mentioned, selecting fruit while his eyes scanned for observers. He's bringing special equipment, things that officially don't exist. A slight smile. Advantages of maintaining certain naval intelligence connections. Throughout the morning, more pieces fell into place. Jack disappeared to establish observation posts disguised as landscape photography positions. Derek made casual visits to local businesses, his federal law enforcement experience perfect for gathering intelligence while appearing to be a curious tourist. The Russian observers would see nothing suspicious, just a normal day at a rural farm stand. They hadn't survived this long in the private sector without learning to spot surveillance. But they were watching for obvious threats: law enforcement, rival organizations, local resistance. They weren't watching for men who had spent their lives learning to hide in plain sight. "Team's almost assembled," Jack reported during another casual produce purchase. "Marcus is entering the valley now, different route than expected." He spotted counter-surveillance on the main road. Mike continued his normal routine, but he felt the familiar pre-mission energy building, the same focus that had carried them through countless operations worldwide. Local farmers still came and went, buying vegetables and sharing worried whispers about Russian intimidation. They didn't notice how the three combat veterans were systematically building a tactical picture of the entire valley. "It's good to have you back, brother," Derek said quietly as he left, maintaining his trucker cover. "Wish it were under better circumstances." Mike watched his old teammates disperse into their observation positions, invisible to anyone who hadn't trained with them. Dmitry Volkov thought he was dealing with a retired SEAL running a farm stand. He was about to discover he was facing an entire team of professional operators who had spent their lives perfecting the art of unconventional warfare. The real question wasn't whether they could stop Zaslan's operation. The question was how much of the Russian Mafia's carefully built criminal empire they would dismantle in the process. Greater than. Marcus Hayes arrived at River Creek Farm as sunset painted the valley in tactical shadows. He drove a rental RV that looked perfectly tourist standard, except for the military-grade surveillance equipment hidden inside. The team gathered in Mike's office after closing, the familiar rhythm of mission planning taking over. "It's bigger than we thought," Marcus announced, spreading satellite photos across the counter. "Way bigger. This isn't just about controlling local food distribution. Zaslan's building a shadow infrastructure across 3 states." Jack activated a laptop displaying corporate records. Shell companies buying up strategic properties, food processing plants, distribution centers, transportation hubs. They're not just taking territory, they're creating parallel supply lines. "Classic military strategy," Derek added, indicating surveillance photos of similar operations in neighboring regions. "Control the food, you control the population, but there's more." He placed a federal intelligence report on the table. "They're hiring ex-military, special forces operators from 6 different countries, building a private army disguised as security contractors." Mike studied the patterns emerging from their combined intelligence. The Russian Mafia wasn't just running a protection racket, they were executing a sophisticated military operation on American soil. His farm stand wasn't targeted randomly, it was a key position in their strategic advance. 4 more farming communities hit in the last month, Marcus continued, highlighting locations on a map. Same pattern every time: intimidation, property damage, forced partnerships. Local law enforcement either bought off or powerless to stop it. The office fell silent as team members processed the implications. This wasn't just about protecting one community anymore. They were facing a coordinated assault on American food security, executed by professional operators with military precision. They've got a major operations center, Jack reported, pulling up thermal imaging shots. Old warehouse complex 10 miles north. Heavy security, lots of vehicle movement, and look who's been visiting. He displayed photos of known international arms dealers and criminal organization leaders. Vladivostok was just the beginning, Mike realized, pieces clicking into place. We didn't just disrupt a weapons shipment, we exposed their whole expansion strategy. Now, they're implementing it here, but bigger, more sophisticated. Mac's warning growl drew their attention. Through the window they watched another black SUV cruise past. But this time, they understood its true significance. Not just surveillance, it was part of a military-style reconnaissance pattern. They're getting ready to move, Marcus assessed, reading the signs with decades of combat experience. That equipment they damaged at Thompson's Dairy? Message to the community. Next phase will be direct action, probably within 48 hours. Derek's federal contacts had provided more disturbing intelligence. Local banks are compromised. They're freezing farmers' accounts, forcing them to accept Russian financing, creating economic dependence before moving in with direct control. Classic insurgency tactics, Jack noted grimly, but applied to civilian agriculture instead of military targets. Brilliant, in an evil way. The team shifted naturally into operational planning mode. Marcus analyzing tactical options, Jack mapping security vulnerabilities, Derek coordinating potential law enforcement response, just like countless missions before, but this time on home soil. We're outnumbered, Mike stated the obvious. They've got at least 30 operators in the area, support staff, local assets, political protection. Marcus smiled slightly. When were we ever not outnumbered? His expression turned serious. But we've got something they don't. Knowledge of the terrain, community connections, and most importantly, he gestured at the team. We've got men who've spent their lives learning to defeat exactly this kind of operation. As night fell over River Creek Farm, final preparations began. Equipment checked, communications tested, contingencies planned. To any observer, nothing had changed. Just another quiet evening at a rural farm stand. But in Mike's office, 4 combat veterans prepared to demonstrate why some enemies should be more careful about who they threaten. Because tomorrow, Dmitry Volkov would learn that not all warriors wear uniforms and not all battles are fought with obvious weapons. Greater than. Midnight brought the attack they'd been expecting. 3 black SUVs approached River Creek Farm from different directions, their movements coordinated with military precision. Professional operators moving in tactical formation, confident in their superior numbers and equipment. They thought they were raiding a simple farm stand. They were wrong. Mac's warning bark came exactly as planned. The Russian teams breached the outer perimeter, night vision gear giving them confidence in the darkness. They moved like they'd rehearsed this. 2 teams converging on the farm stand while one secured the perimeter. Standard military protocol for an intimidation raid. Contact, Jack's voice whispered through their secure comms. South team, 6 operators, moving in formation, night vision, and tactical gear. He was positioned in a hunting blind that offered perfect overwatch of the approach. Confirmed, Derek responded from his position. North team, 4 operators, similar equipment. Wait. He paused. That's not standard tactical gear. That's Russian Ratnik combat system, military grade. Mike watched through thermal imaging as the teams approached his farm stand. Their movements were textbook perfect for a conventional operation. But they were facing men who had spent their careers perfecting unconventional warfare. Execute, Marcus commanded quietly. The trap was sprung with devastating efficiency. The irrigation systems Mike had modified suddenly activated, spraying specially treated water that rendered night vision useless. Hidden speakers blasted pre-recorded farm equipment sounds, disrupting tactical communications. Motion sensors triggered bright agricultural lights at precisely calculated angles. The Russian operators' perfect formation disintegrated as their technological advantages disappeared. Professional discipline gave way to confusion as they found themselves fighting blind in suddenly unfamiliar terrain. "South team breaking formation," Jack reported with cold satisfaction. "They're splitting up, just like you said they would, Mike." Mike's knowledge of his land proved devastating. The Russians found themselves channeled into prepared zones of control. What looked like random equipment and supplies became obstacles and choke points. Every attempt to regroup led them exactly where the team wanted them. "Remember," Marcus reminded them, "non-lethal only. We want them running, not martyred." The team moved like ghosts through their pre-planned positions. Derek deployed flashbangs disguised as farm equipment. Jack used focused light arrays to create disorienting patterns. Mike and Marcus herded the confused operators with calculated precision. "This isn't random resistance," one Russian voice carried clearly through their surveillance. "These are professional operators." "Withdraw," another voice commanded in accented English. "Fall back to secondary positions." The Russian teams retreated in disarray, their military precision shattered by an enemy they couldn't effectively engage. As they fled, they left behind thousands of dollars of tactical gear, scattered by their hasty withdrawal. "They dropped something else," Derek reported, examining an abandoned pack. "Documentation, operation plans. Looks like we spooked them enough to break protocol." Dawn found the team regrouping in Mike's office, analyzing their success. The Russian surveillance SUVs had disappeared, pulling back to safer distances, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. "They'll adapt," Marcus assessed, studying thermal images of the retreating forces. "Next time they'll come heavier, more men, better equipment." "Let them," Mike replied, watching the sun rise over his farm. "Every adaptation gives us more intelligence. Every escalation tells us more about their capabilities." Jack sorted through the captured equipment, his corporate security experience showing. "This gear, it's not just expensive, it's restricted. Military contracts only. Someone's got serious connections." "Good," Derek smiled grimly. "More evidence for when this goes legal. And it will go legal. They just attacked a civilian business with military-grade weapons." The team dispersed to their cover positions as the valley came alive with morning activity. Local farmers would arrive soon, not knowing how close they'd come to serious violence. The Russian teams would regroup, plan their response, convince themselves they could still win through superior force. But as Mike opened his farm stand for normal business, he allowed himself a small smile. Because Dmitry Volkov had just learned an expensive lesson, some farmers know exactly how to deal with predators, especially those who hunt in predictable patterns. Greater than. News of the night's event spread through Riverdale Valley like wildfire. Farmers arrived at River Creek Farm stand early, their faces showing mixture of fear and hope. Sarah Chen brought extra honey jars, her eyes asking silent questions as she studied Mike's calm demeanor. Old Man Thompson's hands had stopped shaking, watching Mike stack produce with the same precision he'd used to drive off professional attackers. "They're saying there was some kind of fight," Martha Henderson whispered, arranging her vegetables. "Said the Russians ran like they'd seen ghosts." Her voice carried both awe and uncertainty. Mike continued his normal routine, but his tactical awareness never wavered. Marcus was running overwatch from the RV, monitoring Russian communications. Jack had disappeared into town, tracking their withdrawal patterns. Derek worked the crowd in his trucker persona, gathering intelligence from local gossip. "Maybe we should talk about what happened," Sheriff Davies suggested quietly, buying his usual produce. "Communities got questions. They need answers." Mike studied the valley, noting how the black SUVs now kept their distance. "They need more than answers," he replied. "They need to be ready. This isn't over." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Town hall meeting, tonight? People deserve to know what they're facing." His hand brushed his holster unconsciously, and how to face it. Throughout the morning, Mike watched the subtle shift in his community. Farmers who'd arrived scared began standing straighter, talking more openly. The Russians' aura of invincibility had cracked. Now it was time to shatter it completely. "We've got movement," Marcus reported through their comms. "Dimitri's calling in reinforcements. Looks like former Spetsnaz, heavy hitters." "Good," Mike replied, helping Tommy Chen unload honey jars. "Let them come. Every new operator they bring is another one we can identify." The town hall filled beyond capacity that evening. Farmers, business owners, families, all packed in, looking for answers. Mike stood before them, no longer just a farm stand owner. They saw him now as what he truly was, a warrior who'd chosen to protect their community. "What happened last night wasn't random," he began. "The Russian Mafia isn't just trying to extort money, they're attempting a military-style takeover of our food distribution system." He laid out the threat in clear terms, watching understanding dawn in their faces. "But we're not soldiers," someone protested. "We're just farmers." "You're Americans," Mike corrected firmly, "and your farms, your businesses, your homes, they're worth defending. We're going to show you how." The team moved through the crowd with professional purpose. Marcus explaining communication networks, Jack demonstrating security measures, Derek teaching basic surveillance recognition. Farmers who'd spent their lives working the land learned to spot tactical movements. Shop owners who'd feared Russian intimidation now understood defensive positioning. "They'll come back harder," Mike warned as the meeting concluded. "But this time, we'll be ready. Not just my team, all of us." Sarah Chen stood up, her voice carrying clear conviction. "My father fought for his homeland before coming to America. He taught me that some things are worth fighting for." "Damn right," Thompson added, others nodding. "This is our valley, our homes." The Russians watching the town hall from their distant positions saw only a community meeting. They couldn't know that inside. A resistance network was being born, farmers and merchants learning to work together, creating communication chains, establishing security protocols. Mike watched his neighbors transform from victims into defenders, felt the familiar pride of training others to protect what mattered. In his earpiece, Marcus reported more Russian reinforcements arriving, heavy weapons, professional operators, an escalating show of force. But as Mike looked at his community, farmers checking sightlines, shopkeepers practicing emergency protocols, families working together, he smiled slightly. Because Dmitry Volkov was about to learn another expensive lesson. Sometimes the deadliest force isn't the one with the most weapons, but the one with the most to protect. Greater than. Sunrise over Riverdale Valley brought the Russians' answer to their humiliation. Professional mercenaries poured into town, their arrival disguised as a corporate security consultation. Dmitry Volkov had called in his elite assets. Former Spetsnaz operators with dead eyes and combat-scarred faces. The black SUVs multiplied, now supplemented by unmarked tactical vehicles carrying military-grade equipment. 14 new operators spotted, Jack reported from his observation post. Moving in four-man teams, these aren't ordinary thugs. They're running professional counterinsurgency protocols. Mike watched through high-powered optics as the new teams established surveillance positions. Their tactical movements showed advanced training, each operator moving with the precision that came from years of combat experience. They were adapting, learning from their previous failure. "They're targeting community leaders now," Derek's voice crackled through secure comms. "Psychological warfare, making examples of anyone who attended the town hall meeting." The reports came in steadily throughout the morning. Sarah Chen's honey shipment mysteriously rerouted. Thompson's dairy equipment sabotaged again, more sophisticated this time. 3 other farmers' bank accounts suddenly frozen. The Russians were sending a clear message. Resistance would carry a heavy price. "They're good," Marcus observed from his RV command post, monitoring enemy communications, using encrypted channels, rotating frequencies, professional counter-surveillance measures. He paused, listening. Wait, getting something. They're calling it Operation Harvest, full tactical response authorized. The pressure built methodically. Russian teams conducted synchronized shows of force across the valley, professional operators making their presence known, demonstrating their superior numbers and equipment. They wanted the community to understand the futility of resistance. Your tactics were impressive, Dmitri's voice carried across the farm stand as he approached, flanked by two hard-faced operators. Almost like you were expecting us. But now, he gestured at the valley. Now we show you what real military force looks like. Mike continued stacking produce, his movements calm, even as he noted the perfect tactical positioning of Dmitri's guards. You're making the same mistake you made in Vladivostok, he replied quietly. Confusing force with strength. Vladivostok was business, Dmitri's smile turned cold. This is personal. You humiliated Zaslon operators. That requires professional response. He placed a document on the counter. New terms, non-negotiable, signed by sunset, or we demonstrate our capabilities on civilian targets. The threat hung in the morning air like gun smoke. Through their surveillance network, the team watched similar scenes play out across the valley, Russian operators delivering ultimatums, making examples, systematically dismantling community resistance. But they'd miscalculated again. Each act of intimidation, each show of force, only strengthened the community's resolve. Farmers who'd once feared the Russians now tracked their movements, reporting patterns through the networks Mike's team had established. Shop owners who'd faced threats now coordinated intelligence, their businesses becoming observation posts. They're expecting us to break, Sarah Chen declared during an emergency community meeting, to see their numbers, their weapons, and lose hope. Her voice carried the strength of generations who'd faced similar threats. But this is our home. We won't break. As sunset approached, Mike studied the document Dmitri had left. The terms were exactly what he'd expected. Complete surrender disguised as a business agreement. The Russians thought their show of force had demonstrated their supremacy. Team check, Marcus called through comms. They're mobilizing for something big, multiple units moving into attack positions. Mike watched the valley darken, noting how the community's light stayed on, defiant against the gathering threats. Dmitri Volkov thought he was facing a broken resistance. Instead, he was about to discover why some communities become strongest exactly when enemies think they're most vulnerable. Greater than. The attack came at dawn, not against River Creek Farm, but against the valley's crucial food distribution routes. Russian teams hit 3 supply convoys simultaneously, their tactics showing ruthless efficiency. Local truckers found roads blocked by accidents, delivery routes mysteriously rerouted, shipments vanished entirely. They're targeting the supply chain, Jack reported, tracking multiple tactical teams through his surveillance network. Cutting off distribution to force compliance, classic insurgency strategy. Mike watched from his farm stand as the morning's deliveries failed to arrive. Sarah Chen's honey trucks turned back by armed men in security uniforms. Thompson's milk deliveries intercepted at county lines. The Russians were demonstrating their ability to strangle the valley's economic lifelines. 4 more roadblocks established, Derek's voice crackled through comms. They're using private security contractors, all legal on paper, but look at their movement patterns. He transmitted tactical footage. These aren't guards. They're military operators running coordinated interdiction. But Mike's team had prepared for this. Throughout the valley, backup plans activated with quiet precision. Local hunters guided trucks through backwoods routes they'd used for generations. Farm equipment suddenly appeared to clear blocked roads. Community members formed volunteer escort convoys, their presence making it harder for the Russians to maintain their thin veneer of legitimate security operations. Interesting tactic, Dmitri observed, appearing at the farm stand as Mike coordinated the resistance. Using civilian volunteers to counter professional operators. Creative. His smile didn't reach his eyes. But ultimately futile. We control all major access points now. Do you? Mike continued arranging produce, but his words carried deadly certainty. Check your Northern Supply interdiction team. On cue, Marcus's voice reported through their secure channel. Northern blockade just collapsed. Their security contractors had some interesting immigration status issues. Federal authorities were very interested. Dmitri's expression hardened as reports reached him. His perfectly coordinated operation was unraveling. Civilian vehicles somehow slipped through blockades. Critical supplies reached their destinations through routes his teams couldn't find. The community's intimate knowledge of their land was defeating military precision. Your people are learning, Dmitri admitted grudgingly, but they're still amateurs against professionals. We've taken harder targets than this valley. That's your mistake, Mike replied calmly. You think you're fighting farmers and shopkeepers? You're not. You're fighting Americans defending their homes. There's nothing harder to defeat than that. Throughout the day, the pattern repeated. Russian teams would establish blockades only to find their positions compromised by local knowledge. Professional operators faced resistance from ordinary citizens who knew every back road and hidden trail in their valley. Southeast checkpoint neutralized, Jack reported with satisfaction. Amazing how many routine inspections local authorities can conduct when properly motivated. Western route secured, Derek added. Those game cameras hunters placed last season are providing excellent surveillance coverage. The Russians' stranglehold on the valley's supply lines began to crack. Their tactical advantage meant nothing against a community that had spent generations learning every inch of their land. Each failed interdiction cost them resources and exposed their operators to official scrutiny. They're pulling back, Marcus observed as evening approached, regrouping for a different strategy. But look at their communication patterns. They're getting frustrated, making mistakes. Mike watched the last of the day's deliveries arrive safely at his farm stand. The Russians had wanted to demonstrate their power over the valley's food supply. Instead, they'd revealed their own vulnerabilities against united community resistance. Tell the team to stay alert, he instructed, as darkness fell. Dmitri won't take this failure well. He'll try something more direct next. Because professional operators were predictable that way. When sophisticated tactics failed, they always resorted to brute force. But that's exactly what Mike's team had been counting on. Sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy was to make them angry enough to make mistakes. Greater than. Jack's laptop cast a blue glow across Mike's office as the team gathered for their midnight briefing. What they discovered in the Russians' financial records made their tactical operations look amateur by comparison. A web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and political payoffs that stretched across continents. It's a whole shadow economy, Jack explained, tracking money flows across his screen. They're not just taking over farms, they're building parallel financial infrastructure. Look at these transfer patterns. He highlighted suspicious transactions. Every protection payment gets laundered through legitimate businesses, then reinvested in more acquisitions. Marcus studied the data with the same intensity he once used to analyze enemy positions. Local banks are compromised. Judge Williams's mortgage suddenly being called in? Not random. They're systematically targeting anyone with influence. Found something else, Derek added, spreading out federal intelligence reports. They're a corporate front. Volkov Agricultural Enterprises? It's received government contracts in 3 states. They're using legitimate business operations to mask criminal takeovers. Mike watched the evidence pile up. Wire transfers to offshore accounts. Property records showing systematic acquisition of key agricultural assets. Political donations timed perfectly with favorable regulatory decisions. The Russians weren't just criminals, they were building an empire. Got movement, Jack reported suddenly, eyes on his surveillance feeds. Large cash withdrawal from First Valley Bank. After hours, he zoomed in on thermal imaging. That's the bank president himself making the delivery. Through their observation network, they watched the late-night exchange. Bank officials passing briefcases to Russian operators in empty parking lots. Local politicians having secret meetings in supposedly closed restaurants. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had suspected. They're getting sloppy, Marcus noted, monitoring their encrypted communications. Pressure's making them take risks. Look at these message patterns. They're breaking their own security protocols. The team's methodical intelligence gathering was paying off. Every financial transaction they uncovered revealed new connections. Every compromised official exposed new vulnerabilities in the Russians' operation. Here's the real target, Derek said, pulling up satellite imagery. Grain storage facilities, transportation hubs, processing centers. They're not just buying farms, they're trying to control the entire food supply chain. Mac's warning growl drew their attention. Through the window, they watched another late-night convoy pass, expensive SUVs escorting armored cars, more payoffs being distributed, more officials being compromised. They're accelerating their timeline, Jack observed, tracking the vehicles through his system. These payments, they're preparing for something big, multiple property acquisitions scheduled for tomorrow, all with the same judge signing the papers. Mike studied the pattern emerging from their combined intelligence. The Russians' tactical operations were just a distraction. The real takeover was happening through paperwork and bank transfers. They weren't just fighting operators on the ground, they were facing a sophisticated financial assault. Send everything to my federal contacts, Derek decided, copying files. Corruption this deep, we'll need official support eventually. Build the case now. Keep watching those accounts, Marcus ordered Jack. Every transaction tells us more about their network, their weaknesses. The night deepened as the team continued their digital surveillance. More convoys moved through darkness. More deals were made in shadows. But with each transaction, each secret meeting, the Russians revealed more of their operation to watching eyes. They think money and violence are their strongest weapons, Mike said quietly, watching another payoff delivered. But every empire built on corruption has the same weakness. It only takes one thread pulled to unravel the whole thing. Because Dmitry Volkov was about to learn another lesson, sometimes the deadliest enemies aren't the ones with guns, but the ones tracking your bank accounts with military precision. Greater than. Morning light crept across River Creek Farm as Mike faced the cost of their investigation. Sarah Chen stood in his office, tears streaming down her face. The Russians had canceled Tommy's college scholarship. Not just canceled, they'd blacklisted him from every major university in 3 states. A clear message about the price of resistance. They said it's just business, Sarah whispered, hands trembling around her coffee cup. Said accidents happen to young people all the time, that maybe Tommy should focus on safer career choices. Mike felt the familiar cold fury he'd known in combat, the kind that sharpened focus rather than clouding it. Through his earpiece he heard his team's reactions, Marcus swearing quietly, Jack's sharp intake of breath, Derek's low growl of anger. They're targeting families now, Marcus reported through comms. Thompson's grandson just lost his job at the processing plant. Henderson's daughter suddenly under investigation at her bank. They're going after our people's children. The personal attacks spread through the community like poison. College acceptances revoked. Job offers withdrawn. Small accidents happening to young people whose parents stood against the Russians. Dmitry was demonstrating that no one was beyond his reach. It's my fault, Sarah said, staring into her cup. If I hadn't supported your stand against them, no. Mike's voice carried the same quiet authority that had once commanded elite operators. They chose this, and they just made their biggest mistake. He keyed his comms. Team, new priority. I want everything on their personal operations, every account, every connection, every secret they've got. The team moved with cold efficiency. Jack's financial tracking expanded to include personal data. Derek's law enforcement contacts dug deeper into private records. Marcus coordinated intelligence gathering with lethal precision. Found something, Jack reported by mid-morning. Dimitri's son attends Princeton, under an assumed name, full scholarship, perfect grades, and evidence of systematic cheating. Every test answer purchased, every paper written by others. Got more, Derek added. Offshore accounts in their children's names, tax evasion, money laundering, enough to trigger automatic federal investigations if exposed. The Russians had thought targeting families would break the community's resistance. Instead, they'd given Mike's team permission to strike back where it really hurt. Professional operators knew the deadliest attacks weren't against assets, but against what people truly valued. Dimitri appeared at the farm stand as sunset approached, his confidence already showing cracks. "Interesting day," he said carefully. "Certain private information seems to be circulating, information that should have been secure." "Terrible thing," Mike replied calmly, continuing to stack produce. "When people's children get caught in adult conflicts, when their futures suddenly become uncertain." The threat hung between them, clear as combat orders. Dimitri's face hardened. "You understand this can get much worse. We have resources, connections. So do we." Mike met his gaze steadily. "Difference is we're not afraid to lose them. Question is, are you?" Throughout the valley, the impact of their counterattack spread. Russian operators' private lives suddenly exposed, their families' secrets circulating among federal investigators, their carefully hidden vulnerabilities laid bare. "They're pulling back," Marcus reported as darkness fell. "Canceling their operations against civilian targets. Looks like they got the message." Mike watched Sarah Chen leave his office, her steps lighter now that Tommy's future was secure again. The Russians had thought threatening families would give them leverage. Instead, they'd learned why some lines should never be crossed. Because Mike Connor hadn't spent 15 years in SEAL Team 6 just learning to fight enemies. He'd learned to protect what mattered most. And Dimitri was about to discover that some weapons cut deeper than violence, like watching everything you've built crumble because you threatened the wrong people's children. Greater than. The helicopters arrived at midnight, their black shapes cutting through clouds like war machines. No markings, no lights, just the whisper of rotors that Mike recognized from countless combat operations. These weren't ordinary transport craft. They were military-grade Russian Mi-17S, modified for covert operations. Multiple teams deploying, Marcus reported through comms, tracking thermal signatures. "These aren't regular operators. Look at their movement patterns. These are Zaslan's elite direct action units." Through night vision, Mike watched the new operators establish positions. Their tactical precision was flawless, every movement showing years of special operations experience. The Russians had called in their best, men who'd fought in Syria, Ukraine, Africa, professional killers who specialized in making problems disappear. "Got their signatures," Jack confirmed, monitoring communications. "Former Spetsnaz Alpha Group, GRU military intelligence. These guys aren't thugs. They're state-trained commandos who went private." The new teams moved differently than previous operators. No wasted motion, no unnecessary shows of force. Just cold, methodical establishment of tactical superiority. They weren't here to intimidate, they were here to eliminate resistance with surgical precision. 12 operators confirmed, Derek added, scanning intelligence reports. All with combat experience against Western Special Forces. They know our tactics, our procedures, and they've got something to prove. Dimitri's black SUV rolled up to the farm stand just before dawn, his confidence restored by the elite reinforcements. "Impressive operation you've been running," he said casually, "almost like having a SEAL team in play, so we brought appropriate countermeasures." Two of the new operators flanked him, their stance and bearing instantly recognizable to Mike. These weren't hired muscle, they were apex predators who'd spent careers hunting other Special Forces teams. Their eyes tracked everything with professional assessment, measuring angles, calculating kill zones. "Victor," Dmitri gestured to the taller operator, "former Spetsnaz commander, 20 years experience neutralizing Western Special Operations teams, and Nikolai, GRU's top direct action specialist. They're very interested in testing themselves against SEAL tactics." The threat was clear. The Russians had escalated beyond mere intimidation. These new operators weren't here to pressure or coerce. They were here to eliminate opposition with extreme prejudice. "Last chance to withdraw gracefully," Dmitri offered. "These men, they're not like our previous operators. They don't leave witnesses, don't take prisoners, and they've got something personal to prove against American Special Forces." Through their surveillance network, the team watched more elite operators deploying. Each one moved with the same lethal grace that came from years of high-stakes combat. They were establishing kill zones, preparing infiltration routes, setting up for systematic elimination of resistance. "They're good," Marcus admitted, studying their tactics. "Really good. Former Tier 1 operators, all of them. This is going to get interesting." Mike watched the sun rise over his valley, noting how the new Russian teams had already established overlapping fields of fire covering every approach. They'd analyzed his defenses, identified vulnerabilities, prepared countermeasures for every tactic his team had previously used. "You're right about one thing," Mike told Dmitri quietly. "This isn't like before. Your men want to test themselves against SEALs. That's exactly what they're going to get." Because the Russians had made a critical error, they thought bringing in elite operators would give them tactical superiority. Instead, they'd finally given Mike's team permission to demonstrate why Navy SEALs were considered the deadliest special operations force in history. "Alert the community," Mike commanded, as Dmitri's SUV pulled away. "Full defensive protocols, and team?" His voice carried the cold certainty of a combat veteran preparing for war. "Weapons free. These men want to hunt Special Forces. Let's show them what it feels like to become the prey." Greater than. The valley turned into a combat zone that morning, though no casual observer would notice. Russian elite operators moved like ghosts through the community, their presence marked only by subtle signs that Mike's team had learned to read in a dozen war zones. A shadow crossing a rooftop too smoothly to be civilian. The faint click of tactical communications. The deliberate positioning of seemingly random vehicles. "They're testing our perimeter," Marcus reported, tracking multiple teams through thermal imaging. "Professional reconnaissance, probing for weaknesses. Victor's team is coordinating with military precision." Mike continued his normal farm stand operations, but every movement now carried combat awareness. The Russians had established 3 distinct kill zones covering his position. Sniper teams positioned with textbook precision. Quick reaction forces staged in concealed locations. "Nikolai's group is different," Jack observed through surveillance. "They're not just watching, they're hunting. Looking for our observation posts, our communication nodes. These guys understand counterinsurgency operations. The psychological pressure built methodically. Russian operators conducted systematic intimidation, demonstrating their ability to strike anywhere. A window shattered by a precision shot while Sarah Chen worked her hives. Thompson's tractor disabled by expertly placed explosives, professional messages about vulnerability. "They're good," Derek admitted, monitoring their tactics. "Using local sources for intelligence, compromising security systems, building detailed targeting packages." He paused, checking surveillance feeds. "But they're leaving traces, getting sloppy in their confidence." The first direct clash came at noon. Victor's team attempted to infiltrate one of Marcus's observation posts, moving with the silent efficiency of experienced commandos. They found empty positions rigged with sensors. Their own tactics turned against them. "Contact west," Marcus reported calmly. "Four-man team pinned by pre-planned fields of fire. These guys are good. They're already adapting, changing their approach vectors." Throughout the day, the pattern repeated. Elite Russian operators would execute perfect tactical movements, only to find themselves countered by equally professional responses. Their attempts at infiltration met prepared defenses. Their surveillance discovered false patterns designed to mislead. "They're getting frustrated," Jack noted, monitoring their communications. "These guys aren't used to being outmaneuvered. Listen to their chatter. They're starting to make mistakes." Dmitri's SUV appeared at sunset, Victor and Nikolai flanking him with professional vigilance. Their confidence had been replaced by focused intensity. These were men used to quick victories against inferior opponents. Finding equals had shaken their tactical assumptions. "Impressive countermeasures," Dmitri admitted, studying Mike's casual stance. "Almost like you were expecting Spetsnaz tactics, like you've faced them before." "Funny thing about special forces," Mike replied, continuing to close his farm stand. "We all learn from the same playbook. Question is who writes new chapters." The Russian operators watched him with predatory focus, recognizing a fellow professional. Their body language carried both respect and deadly intent. These were men who'd built careers eliminating high-value targets. "Tomorrow, then," Dmitri said quietly, "Victor's men have authorization for direct action. No more games." His smile turned cold. "They're very eager to test themselves against SEALs." As darkness fell, the valley became a deadly chessboard. Russian elite units moved into assault positions, preparing for systematic elimination of resistance. But Mike's team had spent the day preparing their own surprises. "All positions set," Marcus confirmed through secure comms. "Let them come. Sometimes the best ambush is the one the enemy thinks they're springing." Because the Russians had made another critical error, they thought their elite operators would give them tactical superiority. Instead, they'd created a situation Mike's team understood perfectly: professional warriors hunting each other through civilian territory, and SEALs had written the book on that kind of warfare. Greater than. The Russians launched their psychological campaign at dawn, demonstrating their ability to strike without warning. Sarah Chen found her beehives systematically destroyed, each box torn apart with military precision. Thompson's barn erupted in flames that investigation would show were set by professional demolition charges. 3 more farms hit simultaneously, each attack executed with cold efficiency. "They're escalating," Marcus reported, tracking multiple strike teams through their surveillance network. "These aren't random acts of destruction. Look at their target selection, systematic elimination of our support network." Mike studied the pattern through his tactical feeds. Victor's teams were moving with lethal grace, each strike designed to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Professional operators sending clear messages about the cost of defiance. "More coming," Jack warned, monitoring communications. "Nikolai's group is deploying some kind of specialized equipment, military grade. Looks like they're setting up for a major psychological operation." The sound attacks began at mid-morning. Advanced Russian acoustic weapons designed to create disorientation and panic. Subsonic frequencies that rattled windows and triggered primal fear responses. High-pitched emissions that made concentration impossible. "They're using LRAD systems," Derek identified, recognizing the military technology. "Long-range acoustic devices, meant for crowd control, but these are modified for psychological impact. They're trying to break civilian morale." But the community had been prepared. Mike's team had trained them for this kind of warfare. Families moved to pre-designated safe zones. Farmers continued working with protective equipment. Every Russian attempt to create panic met organized resistance. "Interesting response," Dmitri observed. appearing at the farm stand as sonic attacks rattled the valley. Your people should be terrified, running. Instead, they adapt, almost like they've been trained by professionals. Mike continued stacking produce, ignoring the psychological warfare devices, screaming in the distance. "You're fighting the wrong kind of war," he replied calmly. "Fear only works against people who have something to lose. We've already decided what we're willing to lose." The Russians escalated further. Precision sniper shots that just missed civilian targets. Explosions that destroyed property without causing casualties. Each attack demonstrated their capability for greater violence while maintaining plausible deniability. "They're getting frustrated," Marcus noted, monitoring enemy communications. "These tactics usually work, breaking civilian resistance through psychological pressure, but our people aren't breaking." Because Mike's team had taught them something more powerful than fear, the strength of unified resistance. Every Russian attack meant to terrorize instead inspired greater determination. Every demonstration of force revealed more about their tactical procedures. "Victor's team is shifting positions," Jack reported late afternoon. "Setting up for night operations. These guys are good, using thermal masking, counter-surveillance procedures, real professional ghost work." But Mike's team had spent careers learning to hunt other professionals. Each Russian movement was tracked, analyzed, countered. Their psychological warfare met prepared defenses. Their terror tactics revealed their own patterns. "You're wasting resources," Mike told Dmitri as sunset approached. "Professional operators against civilian targets? That's not warfare. That's just bullying with expensive equipment." The Russian's smile vanished. "Tomorrow, then. No more psychological games. Victor's men have authorization for direct elimination of resistance leadership." His eyes carried cold certainty. Sometimes terror requires proper examples. As darkness fell, the valley prepared for what everyone knew was coming. Russian elite units moved into assault positions, ready to demonstrate why they were feared worldwide. But Mike's team had spent the day setting their own preparations. "All teams in position," Marcus confirmed through secure comms. "Let them come with their psychological warfare. Sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't fear or force. It's making your enemy angry enough to make mistakes." Because the Russians had made another crucial error. They thought their psychological operations would break civilian resistance. Instead, they'd created something their elite operators had never faced, an entire community prepared to fight back with professional guidance. Greater than. The Russian elite units launched their coordinated assault at midnight, moving with the lethal precision that had made them feared across multiple war zones. Victor's team led the main thrust, using advanced night vision and thermal masking to approach Mike's farm stand. Nikolai's operators provided overwatch, their sniper positions established with professional excellence. Multiple teams converging, Marcus reported through secure comms. Three-pronged assault, military-grade equipment. They're running this like a special forces operation. But Mike's team had spent days preparing for exactly this scenario. The Russians found their thermal imaging confused by carefully placed heat sources, their night vision advantage neutralized by pre-positioned lighting arrays, their perfect tactical approach channeled into prepared kill zones. "East team compromised," Jack called out, monitoring their surveillance network. "They just triggered the motion sensors, putting them exactly where we want them." The trap was sprung with devastating efficiency. The Russian operators found themselves caught in overlapping fields of fire, their own professional tactics used against them. Non-lethal but precisely targeted shots forced them to break formation, disrupting their carefully planned assault. "West team attempting to compensate," Derek reported, tracking their movements. "But they're following standard Spetsnaz protocols, predictable response patterns." Through his thermal scope, Mike watched the Russian elite unit's perfect coordination shatter. These were men used to being the hunters, not the hunted. Their attempts to regroup met prepared countermeasures. Their tactical adjustments encountered pre-planned responses. "Something's wrong," Victor's voice carried clearly through their intercepted communications. "These aren't civilian defenders. We're facing professional operators." The realization came too late. Mike's team had spent careers learning to counter exactly these kinds of tactics. Each Russian movement was anticipated, each response planned for. Their military precision became a weakness, making them predictable to experienced observers. "Fall back," Nikolai commanded, as another team found themselves pinned by precisely placed fire. Tactical withdrawal, regroup at secondary positions. But the secondary positions had already been compromised. The Russian operators found their retreat routes covered, their support positions neutralized. Professional soldiers suddenly facing the same kind of tactical expertise they'd used against others. "They're breaking formation," Marcus reported with cold satisfaction. "Elite units falling back in disarray. So much for Spetsnaz superiority." Dmitri's SUV appeared at the farm stand as dawn approached, his confidence replaced by barely controlled fury. Victor and Nikolai flanked him, their professional demeanor showing cracks. These were men who'd never failed a direct action mission. "Impressive response," Dmitri admitted through clenched teeth. "Almost like you knew exactly what tactics they'd use, what protocols they'd follow." "Funny thing about special forces," Mike replied calmly, beginning his normal morning routine. "We all study each other, learn each other's playbooks. Question is who's better at writing new chapters." The Russian operators studied him with new respect, recognizing a fellow professional who'd outmaneuvered their best tactics. Their body language shifted from hunters to wary equals, acknowledging a force they hadn't expected to encounter. "This isn't over," Dmitri promised quietly. "We have other resources, other methods." But his threat lacked its previous certainty, because Mike's team had just demonstrated something crucial, that elite Russian operators could be beaten at their own game, that professional military precision could be turned against itself. "All teams report," Marcus called, through secure comms as the Russians withdrew. "Minimal damage, no civilian casualties, complete tactical victory." Because the Russians had made their most serious error yet. They'd assumed their elite units would guarantee victory through superior training and equipment. Instead, they'd discovered why Navy SEALs were considered the world's deadliest special operations force, not just for their ability to fight, but for their skill at turning enemies' strengths into weaknesses. Greater than. The Russian response came with overwhelming force. Not just elite operators this time. Military-grade hardware rolled into the valley under cover of darkness. Armored vehicles disguised as construction equipment. Heavy weapons smuggled in through compromised shipping routes. Dmitry Volkov was done playing by conventional rules. "Multiple high-value targets incoming," Marcus reported, his voice tense. "They're mobilizing everything. Attack helicopters staged at private airfields. Former military equipment acquired through shell companies. This is a full-scale assault." Mike watched through surveillance as Russian teams established combat positions. Victor's operators moved with cold precision, setting up interlocking fields of fire. Nikolai's group deployed advanced electronic warfare equipment, ready to shut down communications and coordination. "They've brought in heavy armor," Jack confirmed, monitoring their tactical feeds. "Modified civilian vehicles carrying military weapons. These aren't just operators anymore. This is an invasion force." The first strikes hit at dawn. Precision mortar fire targeted known resistance positions. Helicopter gunships conducted intimidation runs over the valley. Russian operators moved in tactical formations, supported by armored vehicles and heavy weapons teams. "East sector under heavy fire," Derek reported. "They're using military-grade explosives, professional demo teams, taking out infrastructure, communications, power supply." But Mike's team had prepared for escalation. Throughout the valley, pre-planned defensive positions activated. Local hunters became sniper teams, their intimate knowledge of the terrain proving deadlier than military training. Farmers transformed their equipment into anti-vehicle barriers. Every Russian advance met coordinated resistance. "Something's wrong," Victor's voice crackled through intercepted comms. "Their response patterns. This isn't civilian resistance. We're facing organized military opposition." The Russian assault faltered as their tactical advantages disappeared. Their armored vehicles found themselves trapped in prepared kill zones. Their electronic warfare equipment encountered countermeasures that shouldn't have existed. Their professional operators faced resistance that matched their every move. "Northern team pinned down," Nikolai reported urgently. "Southern advance stalled. We're losing tactical cohesion." Through his scope, Mike watched the Russian operation unravel. Their military precision meant nothing against defenders who knew every inch of the terrain. Their superior equipment became a liability in carefully prepared ambush zones. "They're adapting," Marcus warned. "Switching to secondary protocols. Victor's team is regrouping for a concentrated thrust." The Russians launched their main assault against Mike's farm stand, bringing their full force to bear. Armored vehicles provided cover as elite operators advanced. Helicopter gunships offered air support, a textbook military operation, but Mike's team had spent careers learning to counter exactly these tactics. The helicopters found their targeting systems confused by improvised countermeasures. The armored vehicles hit obstacles that shouldn't have existed. The professional operators faced resistance that anticipated their every move. "Fall back," Victor commanded, as another assault team found themselves pinned down. "This isn't working. They know our playbook." Dmitri's voice cut through their communications, fury replacing his usual control. "Press the attack. We have superior numbers, superior equipment." But superior force meant nothing against prepared defenders fighting on their own ground. The Russian assault broke against organized resistance, their military precision defeated by unconventional warfare. "All teams report," Marcus called through secure channels as the Russians withdrew in disarray. "Minimal casualties, maximum impact. They're running." Because Dmitri had made his final mistake, he thought overwhelming force would guarantee victory. Instead, he'd discovered why some battles aren't won by those with the most weapons, but by those who know exactly how to use their enemy's strength against them. Greater than. The team moved through morning mist like the elite operators they'd never stopped being. Mike led them past his farm stand, each man carrying memories of countless missions. But this time, they weren't fighting on foreign soil. This time, they were defending American ground against foreign invaders. "Victor's team is vulnerable," Marcus reported, studying thermal imaging. "Their failed assault cost them equipment, disrupted their tactical cohesion. Even their elite operators are showing fatigue." 4 men moving like shadows through familiar terrain, Jack coordinating their advanced surveillance network, Derek linking with federal contacts ready to move, Marcus calling out enemy positions with practiced precision, years of combat experience focused on one critical mission. "Nikolai's group is trying to establish a defensive perimeter," Jack confirmed through comms. "But they're making mistakes. Professional operators pushed past their limits, following protocols that aren't working." The Russians had retreated to their command center, an abandoned warehouse complex they'd converted for military operations. Elite units established security positions, armored vehicles provided cover, snipers watched approaches. Standard defensive procedures for professional forces. "They're falling back on basic training," Derek observed, monitoring their movements. "When sophisticated tactics fail, soldiers always return to what they learned first. Makes them predictable." Mike's team approached with the silent efficiency that had made them legends in special operations. Each man knew his role, each movement coordinated through years of combat experience. The Russians had professional operators. The SEALs had brotherhood forged in warfare. "Remember Kandahar?" Marcus whispered as they reached their assault positions. "Same setup, same overconfidence." "Same result," Mike replied softly, watching Russian teams repeat patterns they'd seen dozens of times before. The assault began with precision, born from countless missions. The team struck simultaneously at critical points, their coordinated attack disrupting Russian defensive positions before they could respond. Elite operators found themselves facing opponents who knew their tactics better than they did. "West Sector compromised," Victor's voice carried panic through intercepted comms. "These aren't just operators, they're moving like ghosts." Because that's what Navy SEALs did best: strike without warning, disappear before response, reappear where least expected. The Russians found their defensive positions systematically dismantled by an enemy they couldn't effectively engage. "Multiple teams converging," Nikolai reported urgently. "We can't track them, can't predict their movements." Through his tactical scope, Mike watched the Russian operation collapse. Professional soldiers discovered what it meant to face truly elite operators. Their military precision crumbled against unconventional warfare executed by masters of the craft. "Command center breached," Marcus confirmed as they moved through the complex. "Enemy forces in disarray, complete tactical superiority." They found Dmitri in his command room, surrounded by tactical displays showing his operation's failure. Victor and Nikolai flanked him, their professional demeanor shattered by the experience of being hunted by superior operators. "Impossible," Dmitri whispered, watching his forces surrender to coordinated federal raids. "We had everything: numbers, equipment, elite operators." "You had soldiers," Mike corrected quietly. "We have brothers." Because that was the final lesson Dmitri Volkov had to learn. Some battles aren't won by those with the most resources or the best training. They're won by warriors who fight together, who know each other's movements, who trust each other completely. "All sectors secured," Marcus reported as dawn painted the valley in victory's colors. "Threat neutralized. Area secured." 4 men stood together as federal agents swarmed the complex. Brothers who'd faced combat across the world, now united in defending American soil. The Russians had brought professional operators to threaten a farming community. Instead, they'd discovered why Navy SEALs were considered the deadliest fighting force in history. Greater than. Dawn revealed the full scope of what Mike's team had accomplished. Federal agents swarmed the valley, processing captured Russian operators and securing evidence. Derek coordinated with his law enforcement contacts, ensuring every piece of intelligence they'd gathered would support criminal prosecution. "Final count," Marcus reported, reviewing tactical data. 28 elite operators in custody, 6 armored vehicles seized. Enough military hardware to outfit a small army. He smiled grimly. Plus all their financial records, every transaction, every bribe, every shell company exposed. Jack worked methodically through the Russians' computer systems, his corporate security experience proving invaluable. Their entire network is compromised, not just local operations. We're talking international connections, criminal enterprises across 3 continents. The community watched in amazement as their quiet valley transformed into a federal crime scene. Sarah Chen stood at her honey farm, tears of joy replacing fear as agents dismantled Russian surveillance equipment. Thompson surveyed his dairy with fresh confidence, watching elite operators who'd threatened his family led away in handcuffs. "You did more than stop a criminal takeover," Sheriff Davies told Mike, observing the cleanup. "You exposed a whole shadow network. FBI saying this could lead to dozens of major cases." Through secure channels, the team monitored the broader impact of their victory. Russian criminal operations worldwide suddenly found themselves compromised. Front companies faced federal investigation. Political protection evaporated as evidence of corruption emerged. "Dimitri's singing like a bird," Derek reported with satisfaction. "Trying to cut deals, giving up everything, His bosses, his contacts, his whole organization, man's desperate to avoid federal terrorism charges. Mike watched Victor and Nikolai being processed, their professional demeanor replaced by the resigned acceptance of experienced operators who knew when they'd been completely outmaneuvered. These were men who'd never failed a mission before. Their defeat would send shockwaves through the international criminal community. "Found something interesting," Jack called out, still processing seized data. They weren't just building criminal infrastructure, they were creating parallel governance systems, taking over communities, replacing legitimate authority with their own control structures. The scale of what they'd prevented became clear as federal analysts arrived. The Russians hadn't just targeted one farming community, they'd been establishing a prototype for systematic takeover of rural America. Mike's Valley was meant to be their proof of concept. "You know what this means," Marcus said quietly, watching more evidence teams arrive. "Others will try. Different organizations, different methods, but same basic plan. Rural communities are vulnerable." But Mike saw something else as he observed his neighbors helping federal agents, farmers who'd learned tactical awareness, shop owners who'd mastered coordination techniques, regular people who'd discovered their own strength under professional guidance. "Let them try," he replied, noting how Thompson's teenage son was teaching federal agents about the valley's hidden observation posts. "This community isn't vulnerable anymore, and neither are the others we're going to help." Because that was the real victory, not just stopping one criminal organization, but showing rural Americans how to defend themselves, creating a model of resistance that could be shared, adapted, improved upon. "We've got requests coming in," Derek reported, checking his phone. "Other communities facing similar threats. They want our help, our training, our expertise." The team gathered at Mike's farm stand as evening approached, watching federal trucks carry away the last of the seized equipment. 4 combat veterans who'd found a new mission protecting American soil from enemies who thought rural communities were easy targets. "So what's next?" Marcus asked, though they all knew the answer. Because some battles don't end with victory, they just reveal bigger wars that need fighting. Greater than. The week after the Russians' defeat brought a flood of visitors to River Creek Farm Stand, not just regular customers, but representatives from other rural communities, farmers and sheriffs from 3 states, all facing similar threats, all seeking the same knowledge that had transformed Mike's Valley from vulnerable target to impenetrable fortress. "Cedar Grove's got cartel problems," Marcus reported, reviewing requests for assistance. "Mountain View's fighting corporate takeover attempts, River Junction's dealing with organized crime." He spread maps across Mike's office. "They're all watching what we did here, all wanting to learn." The team had already begun adapting their success into something teachable. Jack developed security protocols that ordinary citizens could implement. Derek created liaison networks between communities and law enforcement. Marcus designed training programs that turned local knowledge into tactical advantage. "It's not just about fighting," Mike explained to a group of visiting farmers. "It's about making your community harder to target, stronger together. Professional criminals look for easy marks. We teach you not to be one." Sarah Chen had become their example of civilian transformation. She now taught other farmers the observation techniques she'd learned, showing them how to turn their daily routines into security protocols. Her son Tommy helped coordinate youth groups, teaching the next generation situational awareness disguised as outdoor activities. 4 more communities requesting assistance, Jack announced, checking surveillance data. Word spreading about what happened here. Criminal organizations are finding their rural targets suddenly less vulnerable. Thompson's Dairy became a training center, showing visiting groups how to transform agricultural operations into defensive positions. His grandson taught other young people the communication networks they'd developed. Every aspect of rural life became a potential security asset. FBI's getting interested, Derek reported, monitoring law enforcement channels. They're seeing the pattern we established here replicated elsewhere. Criminal organizations suddenly finding rural America a lot harder to infiltrate. The team worked methodically, turning their combat experience into practical civilian defense. Each community had different needs, different threats, but the basic principles remained constant. Unity, awareness, coordinated response. "You've started something bigger than you realize," Sheriff Davies told Mike, watching another group of visitors arrive. These communities used to think they were helpless against organized crime. Now they're learning to stand together. Through their expanding network, the team tracked the broader impact. Criminal organizations worldwide suddenly found their rural operations compromised. Tactics that had worked for years became ineffective against prepared communities. The balance of power was shifting. "Got something interesting," Marcus called out, studying tactical data. "Remember those Russian front companies? They're shutting down operations across the country. Seems our little victory sent a message." Mike watched more visitors arrive, each bringing stories of communities under threat, each seeking the knowledge to defend themselves. The Russians had thought targeting his farm stand would be simple intimidation. Instead, they'd helped create a model of rural resistance that was spreading like wildfire. "We'll need to expand," Jack observed, monitoring their growing communication network. "More communities means more training needed, more coordination." "Already on it," Derek replied, checking federal contacts. "Got former operators willing to help. Good men looking for meaningful work, the right kind of experience." Because that was the real victory emerging from their success. Not just defending one valley, but showing others how to defend themselves, creating a network of communities that could stand together against any threat. "They thought rural Americans would be easy targets," Mike told his team, watching another group arrive, seeking knowledge. Time to show them just how wrong they were. Through their secure channels, reports kept flowing. More communities learning, adapting, standing stronger. The Russians had tried to take one farm stand. Instead, they'd helped launch a movement that was transforming rural America from vulnerable target into unified strength. Greater than. The impact of River Creek's victory sent shock waves through the criminal underworld. 2 weeks after the Russians' defeat, Mike's surveillance network picked up chatter that made his team realize just how much they'd changed the game. Criminal organizations worldwide were suddenly reassessing their rural operations, finding their usual tactics useless against prepared communities. "Got intercepts from 3 different cartels," Marcus reported, monitoring international communications. "They're pulling back from rural territories, calling off planned expansions. Our success here scared them, showed them small communities aren't easy targets anymore." Jack's corporate security connections revealed an even bigger shift. Major criminal enterprises are shutting down their rural operations, selling off front companies, abandoning territories they've controlled for years. They're running scared. The evidence piled up in Mike's office. Reports of criminal organizations suddenly finding their rural operations compromised, tactical teams encountering unexpected resistance, professional operators discovering their usual intimidation tactics no longer worked. "It's not just our valley," Derek confirmed, checking law enforcement channels. "Communities across the country are adapting our methods, creating their own defense networks, standing together against threats." Through their expanding communication system, success stories flowed in. Cedar Grove's farmers had driven off cartel enforcers using techniques they'd learned from Mike's team. Mountain View's community had exposed corporate corruption using Jack's surveillance protocols. River Junction's citizens had dismantled a criminal operation using Derek's law enforcement liaison network. 6 more communities requesting training, Marcus announced, reviewing tactical data. They've seen what happened here. Want to learn how regular citizens can stand against professional criminals. Sarah Chen had become their ambassador, traveling to other farming communities, showing them how to transform daily routines into security measures. Thompson's Dairy hosted training sessions, teaching others how to turn agricultural operations into defensive networks. FBI is calling it the Rural Defense Initiative, Derek reported with satisfaction. They're studying our model, looking to support similar programs nationwide. We didn't just stop one criminal operation, we created a template for others to follow. The team worked methodically, refining their success into something reproducible. Each community had different challenges, but the core principles remained the same: unity, awareness, coordinated response under professional guidance. International implications too, Jack noted, monitoring global patterns. Criminal organizations worldwide are finding their rural operations compromised. The tactics that worked for years suddenly fail against prepared communities. Mike watched another group of visitors arrive at his farm stand, seeking knowledge that could protect their homes. The Russians had thought intimidating one farmer would be simple. Instead, they'd helped create a movement that was transforming rural America from vulnerable target into unified strength. Got something interesting, Marcus called out, studying intelligence reports. Remember Dimitri's bosses? They're facing internal collapse. Seems losing to American farmers wasn't good for their reputation. Through secure channels, the impact continued spreading. More communities learning, adapting, standing stronger. The Russians' attempt to take one farm stand had sparked a chain reaction that was reshaping the balance of power in rural territories worldwide. We'll need to expand our operation, Derek suggested, checking his contacts. More communities means more training needed, more coordination required, because that was the real victory emerging from their success. Not just defending one valley, but showing others how to defend themselves, creating a network of communities that could stand together against any threat. They thought rural Americans would be easy targets, Mike told his team, watching more visitors arrive seeking knowledge. Instead, they helped us prove just how strong communities can be when they stand together. Greater than. 3 weeks after the Russians' defeat, River Creek Farm Stand had transformed into something uniquely powerful, a place where fresh produce and tactical awareness coexisted naturally. Mike watched his morning customers move through the displays, noting how they unconsciously maintained security protocols while selecting vegetables. Sarah Chen's honey jars now arranged for optimal surveillance coverage. Thompson's Dairy deliveries timed to support regular perimeter checks. It's become second nature to them, Marcus observed, disguised as a regular customer studying tomatoes. They're not just farmers anymore. They're defenders who farm, security that grows from the ground up. The valley had found a new rhythm, blending rural life with professional vigilance. Farmers checked their fields with tactical awareness. Shop owners maintained communication networks while serving customers. Children played games that subtly reinforced observation skills. Communities different now, Jack reported, monitoring their upgraded security systems. But not in the way the Russians expected. They thought threats would break these people. Instead, pressure just made them stronger. Through their surveillance network, they watched the valley's daily operations. Thompson's teenage son coordinating youth patrols disguised as nature hikes. Sarah Chen teaching new beekeepers how to use their hives for perimeter security. Regular people who'd learned to protect themselves without losing their way of life. 4 more training sessions scheduled this week, Derek announced, checking their expanding program. Other communities want to learn how we blend normal operations with security protocols, how we stay vigilant without living in fear. Mike's farm stand had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of how rural communities could defend themselves while maintaining their values. The Russians had tried to destroy this way of life. Instead, they'd helped make it stronger. Got something interesting, Marcus called out, studying pattern analysis. Remember how quiet the valley used to be? Now we've got one of the most sophisticated civilian defense networks in the country, all growing naturally from daily routines. The team watched their success ripple through normal operations. Farmers' markets now included subtle security coordination. Church socials doubled as communication network meetings. County fairs incorporated training disguised as community activities. FBI's studying our model, Derek noted with satisfaction. They're calling it organic security, defense systems that grow naturally from community activities, protection that strengthens normal life instead of disrupting it. Through their observation posts, they monitored the valley's transformation. What looked like ordinary rural activities now carried deeper purpose. Every aspect of community life reinforced their defensive capabilities while preserving their peaceful nature. Dmitri would never understand this, Jack observed, watching children play games that taught tactical awareness. He thought intimidation would destroy their way of life. Instead, it just evolved into something stronger. Mike helped Tommy Chen unload honey deliveries, noting how the boy naturally maintained security protocols while working. The Russians had tried to threaten these people into submission. Instead, they'd helped create a community that was stronger precisely because it stayed true to its values. Got more requests for training, Marcus reported, checking their expanding network. Communities nationwide want to learn how we did this, how we turned regular people into defenders without losing who they are. Because that was the real victory emerging from their struggle, not just stopping one threat, but showing how rural life could adapt and strengthen without sacrificing its essential nature, creating a model where peace and protection grew together naturally. They never understood what they were really threatening, Mike told his team, watching his community's quiet strength in action. These people aren't just defenders now. They're pioneers showing others how to stay strong while staying true to themselves. Greater than. 1 month after their victory, the team gathered at Mike's farm stand to make decisions that would shape not just their future, but the future of rural communities nationwide. The evening sun painted the valley in golden light as they studied maps showing their expanding influence. Requests for training poured in from across the country, communities seeking the knowledge that had transformed River Creek Valley from vulnerable target to unshakable stronghold. We've got a choice to make, Marcus announced, laying out their options. Stay focused here, maintain what we've built, or expand, help other communities stand strong. Either way, things are changing. Jack's surveillance feeds showed their success spreading like wildfire. 26 communities have already adapted our basic protocols, another 40 requesting training. This is becoming something bigger than we planned. The evidence of their impact filled Mike's office. Reports of criminal organizations abandoning rural territories, intelligence showing professional operators refusing assignments against prepared communities. Their victory had sparked something that couldn't be contained. FBI wants to formalize our program, Derek reported, checking federal communications. Create official channels for community defense training. They're calling us civilian security consultants now. Through their network, success stories kept flowing. Cedar Grove had driven off corporate raiders using their tactics. Mountain View's defenders had exposed criminal infiltration using their protocols. River Junction's security network had prevented a cartel takeover attempt. We've got options, Marcus continued, outlining possibilities. Could establish training centers, coordinate regional defense networks, turn this into a real operation. Question is, are we ready for that level of commitment? The team studied their expanding influence. What had started as defending one farm stand had evolved into something that was reshaping rural America's relationship with security. Communities weren't just learning to defend themselves, they were discovering their own strength. Got something interesting, Jack noted, monitoring patterns. Other Special Forces veterans are reaching out. Good operators looking for meaningful work. They see what we've built here, want to help expand it. Mike watched sunset paint his valley in familiar colors, remembering why he'd chosen this life. The Russians had thought threatening his farm stand would be simple intimidation. Instead, they'd helped create a movement that was transforming rural communities from vulnerable targets into unified strength. This isn't just about security anymore, Derek observed, reviewing their impact. We're showing communities how to stand together, stay strong without losing their values. That's worth expanding. The decision crystallized as they watched their valley's evening routine. Farmers running security checks while bringing in equipment. Shop owners maintaining surveillance while closing up. Regular people who'd learned to defend themselves while preserving their way of life. "I'm in," Marcus declared first, the others quickly agreeing. "These communities need what we can teach them, need the kind of strength we've built here." Because that was the real opportunity emerging from their victory. Not just defending one valley, but helping others discover their own power. Creating a network of communities that could stand strong together against any threat. They thought rural Americans would be easy targets, Mike told his team, watching his community's quiet strength in action. Time to show them just how wrong they were, not just here, but everywhere. As darkness fell, the team began planning their expansion. What had started as one phone call to old teammates had grown into something that was reshaping the balance of power in rural America. And they were just getting started. Greater than. The transformation of rural America happened quietly but methodically, just like everything Mike's team did. 6 weeks after their victory, intelligence reports painted a picture that even they found surprising. Communities across the country weren't just copying their defense model, they were improving it, adapting it to local needs, creating a network of strength that criminal organizations never saw coming. "Got the latest numbers," Marcus reported, spreading maps across the farm stand counter. 38 communities have fully implemented our protocols, another 60 in training. Criminal operations abandoning rural territories faster than we can track. Jack's surveillance network captured the broader impact. Cartel activities down 60% in protected areas, corporate takeover attempts failing systematically, professional operators refusing assignments against prepared communities. We've changed the whole game. Through their expanding communication system, success stories flowed constantly. A small town in Montana had driven off organized crime using their tactics. A farming community in Ohio had prevented corporate land seizures using their protocols. A rural valley in Texas had dismantled a smuggling operation using their training. "FBI's officially endorsing our program," Derek announced, checking federal channels. "They're calling it a revolutionary approach to rural security, making it easier for communities to implement our methods legally." The team watched their influence spread through legitimate channels, law enforcement agencies adopting their protocols, agricultural organizations incorporating their security measures. What started as defending one farm stand had evolved into a movement reshaping rural America's relationship with security. Something interesting in the pattern, Jack noted, studying data. Criminal organizations aren't just avoiding protected communities. They're withdrawing from rural operations entirely, found it too costly to deal with prepared defenders. Mike helped Sarah Chen unload honey deliveries, noting how naturally she maintained tactical awareness while working. The Russians had thought threatening his community would be simple intimidation. Instead, they'd helped launch something that was making rural America too strong to threaten. "Got more veterans joining the program," Marcus reported, checking their expanding network. "Former operators who see what we've built want to help other communities stand strong. Good men looking for meaningful work." The evidence of their impact filled Mike's office. Reports of criminal enterprises finding their rural operations compromised. Intelligence showing professional operators warning others away from protected territories. Their model had turned rural communities from soft targets into hard ones. "It's not just about security anymore," Derek observed, reviewing their success. "These communities are discovering their own strength, learning to stand together. That's what makes this unstoppable." Through their surveillance network, they watched the transformation continue. Farmers markets incorporating security coordination, county fairs including defensive training, rural life adapting and strengthening while preserving its essential nature. "Got something significant," Jack called out, monitoring global patterns. "International criminal organizations are reassessing their entire rural strategy. Our success here is changing their operational doctrine worldwide." Because that was the real victory emerging from their struggle. Not just protecting one valley, but showing rural communities everywhere how to protect themselves, creating a network of strength that grew stronger with each new member. "They thought rural Americans would be easy targets," Mike told his team, watching more communities join their network. "Instead, they helped us prove just how powerful people become when they stand together." The transformation continued, quiet but unstoppable. What started as one SEAL team defending a farm stand had evolved into a movement making rural America too strong to threaten, and they were just getting started. Greater than. 2 months after the Russians' defeat, River Creek Farm Stand had become something unique in rural America, a place where strength and peace grew together naturally. The morning sun found Mike restocking produce displays that doubled as surveillance positions, watching his community demonstrate what real security looked like when it grew from the ground up. "Business is booming," Marcus observed, disguised as a regular customer. "Not just produce sales. People come here to see how it works, how a farming community became too strong to threaten while staying true to itself." The evidence of their success filled the valley. Sarah Chen's honey operation had expanded, her delivery routes now helping coordinate regional security networks. Thompson's dairy supplied half the state, their distribution system incorporating defensive protocols that other communities studied and copied. "Got the latest market numbers," Jack reported, monitoring their impact. "Local agricultural revenues up 40%, small business growth highest in the region. Turns out security and prosperity grow together when you do it right." Through their surveillance network, they watched their community thrive. Farmers markets drew customers from 3 states, people coming as much for the sense of security as the fresh produce. Local businesses expanded, protected by a defense network that made professional criminals avoid the entire region. "FBI's sending another study team," Derek announced, checking official channels. "They want to understand how we've managed to increase both security and economic growth, how we've made the whole region stronger." The team observed their valley's transformation. What had started as desperate defense against Russian threats had evolved into something that strengthened every aspect of community life. Farmers worked their land with quiet confidence. Shop owners operated without fear. Families thrived under invisible but constant protection. "Something interesting in the pattern," Jack noted, studying data. "Other communities implementing our methods are seeing similar growth. Security doesn't just stop threats, it creates opportunities." Mike helped Tommy Chen unload supplies, watching how naturally the boy maintained tactical awareness while working. The Russians had thought threatening their community would break its spirit. Instead, they'd helped create something that made rural life stronger than ever. "Got more investment coming in," Marcus reported, checking economic indicators. "Legitimate businesses want to operate in secure areas. Our community's becoming a model for rural development." The evidence of their impact surrounded them. New businesses opening under the protection of their security network. Agricultural operations expanding with confidence. A community growing stronger because it had learned to protect itself while staying true to its values. "It's not just about defense anymore," Derek observed, reviewing their success. We've shown how communities can thrive when they stand together. That's what makes this sustainable. Through their observation posts, they watch their valley prosper. What looked like ordinary rural activities now carried deeper purpose. Every aspect of community life reinforced their security while supporting natural growth. "Got something significant," Jack called out, monitoring trends. Other regions are studying our economic model. They're seeing how security and prosperity reinforce each other when done right. Because that was the real victory emerging from their struggle, not just stopping threats, but showing how rural communities could grow stronger while staying true to themselves, creating a model where peace and protection nurtured each other naturally. "They thought threatening us would make us weaker," Mike told his team, watching his community's quiet strength in action. "Instead, they helped us discover just how strong we could become." Greater than. 3 months after their victory, the true legacy of Mike's team had become clear. River Creek Valley hadn't just survived a Russian assault, it had evolved into something that was changing how rural America thought about strength. The morning light found Mike at his farm stand, watching his community demonstrate what real security looked like when it became part of daily life. "Got the quarterly assessment," Marcus reported, reviewing their impact. "Not a single criminal operation attempted in protected territories, no corporate takeover attempts, no cartel activity. We haven't just driven them out, we've convinced them not to come back." The evidence surrounded them. Farmers working their land with quiet confidence, their daily routines incorporating security measures that had become second nature. Shop owners operating without fear, their businesses protected by networks that made professional criminals avoid the entire region. "Something remarkable in the data," Jack noted, monitoring patterns. "It's not just about security anymore. These communities are showing higher economic growth, stronger social bonds, better quality of life. Protection isn't just stopping threats, it's helping people thrive." Through their surveillance system, they watched their legacy take root. Sarah Chen teaching new beekeepers not just about honey production, but about turning their operations into security assets. Thompson's Dairy hosting workshops where farmers learn to blend agricultural efficiency with defensive awareness. "FBI's making it official," Derek announced, checking federal channels. "They're establishing a rural security initiative based on our model, making it easier for communities nationwide to implement what we've built here." The team observed how naturally their protocols had been absorbed into daily life. Children played games that subtly reinforced observation skills. Community events doubled as security coordination. Every aspect of rural life had adapted to include protection without losing its essential nature. "Got something interesting," Marcus called out, studying reports. "Remember how Dmitri thought intimidation would break these communities? Latest intelligence shows criminal organizations now actively avoid targeting areas that have implemented our methods. They've learned these aren't soft targets anymore." Mike helped unload morning deliveries, noting how smoothly security protocols blended with normal operations. The Russians had thought threatening his farm stand would be simple intimidation. Instead, they'd helped create a model that was making rural America too strong to threaten. "More communities joining the network," Jack reported, checking their expansion. "They're not just copying our methods, they're improving them, adapting them to local needs. This has become something bigger than we imagined." The evidence of lasting change filled their valley. New businesses thriving under invisible protection, agricultural operations expanding with confidence. A community that had learned not just to defend itself, but to grow stronger through unity. "Got the latest federal assessment," Derek added, reviewing official data. "They're calling it a paradigm shift in rural security. Communities implementing our model show increased prosperity, stronger social bonds, better resilience against all types of threats." Because that was the real victory emerging from their struggle. Not just stopping one enemy, but showing rural communities everywhere how to protect themselves while staying true to their values, creating a legacy of strength that grew naturally from the ground up. They thought threatening us would make us submit, Mike told his team, watching his community's quiet power in action. Instead, they helped us discover just how strong we could become when we stand together. Greater than, the black SUV that pulled up to River Creek Farm Stand bore diplomatic plates, but Mike recognized the real significance. Through his surveillance network, he watched Dmitry Volkov emerge, not as a threat this time, but as a broken man seeking answers. 3 months in federal custody had stripped away his confidence, leaving someone who needed to understand how completely his operation had failed. "Interesting visitor," Marcus noted through comms. 4 federal agents watching him, all his assets seized, his entire organization dismantled. Man's lost everything. Mike continued arranging produce displays, maintaining the same calm efficiency that had helped defeat Dmitry's elite operators. The Russian's expensive suit had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing, his commanding presence diminished by defeat. "You've created something remarkable here," Dmitry said quietly, studying the bustling farm stand. "Not just defense, something entirely new. My operators still talk about it, how farmers and shopkeepers defeated Russian special forces." Through their surveillance feeds, the team watched more signs of their victory. Sarah Chen confidently working her honey stand, her son Tommy helping coordinate youth security patrols. Thompson's dairy vehicles moving with tactical precision that professional operators now respected. "Got the final numbers," Jack reported, monitoring intelligence channels. Zaslon's completely collapsed, their entire rural operation dismantled. Other criminal organizations studying their failure, learning to avoid protected communities. Dmitry watched customers move through the farm stand, his trained eye noting how naturally they maintained security protocols while shopping. "We thought threatening rural Americans would be simple," he admitted. "Instead, we helped teach them how strong they really are." "You never understood what you were really fighting," Mike replied, continuing his work. "These aren't just farmers or shopkeepers. They're Americans defending their homes. There's nothing stronger than that." The evidence surrounded them. A community that had learned not just to defend itself, but to thrive through unity. Security measures that had become as natural as growing crops or tending livestock. Protection that grew stronger by being part of daily life. "Got something interesting," Marcus called out, monitoring patterns. "Remember those Russian front companies? They're all being converted to legitimate businesses now. Seems even our enemies learned something about honest work." Through their observation posts, they watched their legacy in action. What had started as desperate defense against Russian threats had evolved into something that strengthened every aspect of rural life. A model of community protection that was spreading nationwide. "More success stories coming in," Derek added, checking their network. "Communities using our methods aren't just safer, they're stronger in every way, growing, prospering, showing others what's possible." Dmitry stood quietly, absorbing the impact of his defeat. "We had everything," he said finally. "Numbers, equipment, professional operators. But we never understood what we were really fighting against." "No," Mike agreed, watching his community's quiet strength in action. "You thought you were facing simple farmers. Instead, you helped create something that's changing how rural America protects itself. Because that was the real victory emerging from their confrontation. Not just defeating one enemy, but showing communities everywhere how to stand strong together, creating a legacy of protection that grew naturally from the very soil they defended." "They'll write about this operation," Dmitry said as he turned to leave. "How American farmers defeated Russian special forces. But they'll never understand the real story, will they?" Mike watched him go, remembering the phone call that had started everything. "No," he replied quietly. "They'll never understand that sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones who fight to protect home. Greater than. 1 year after the Russians' defeat, Dawn found Mike Connor exactly where he belonged, checking soil moisture at River Creek Farm Stand. His practiced movements carried the same precision he'd once used in combat, but now they served a different kind of protection. Around him, his valley demonstrated what real security looked like when it grew naturally from the community it protected. Got the annual assessment, Marcus reported, reviewing their legacy. Over 200 communities nationwide have implemented our methods. Criminal organizations completely withdrawn from protected territories, we've changed the whole landscape of rural America. The evidence surrounded them. Sarah Chen's honey operation had become a regional training center, teaching other farmers how to blend agricultural success with security awareness. Thompson's Dairy hosted regular workshops where communities learned to transform rural businesses into defensive assets. Something remarkable in the data, Jack noted, monitoring their network. Protected communities showing record growth, higher property values, stronger local economies. Turns out security isn't just about defense, it's about helping people prosper. Through their surveillance system, they watched their vision bloom. What had started as desperate resistance against Russian threats had evolved into something that strengthened every aspect of rural life. A model of community protection that grew stronger with each new harvest. FBI's made it permanent, Derek announced, checking federal channels. Rural Security Initiative officially established nationwide. They're using our valley as the template for how communities can defend themselves while staying true to their values. The team observed their success in action. Farmers' markets that doubled as security coordination centers, county fairs incorporating defensive training into traditional activities, rural life adapting and strengthening while preserving its essential nature. Got something interesting, Marcus called out, studying patterns. Remember how professional criminals used to target rural communities? Now, they actively avoid protected territories. We haven't just driven them out, we've convinced them not to come back. Mike helped Tommy Chen unload honey deliveries, watching how naturally the boy maintained tactical awareness while working. The Russians had thought threatening one farm stand would be simple intimidation. Instead, they'd helped create a movement that had made rural America too strong to threaten. More success stories every day, Jack reported, checking their expanding influence. Communities aren't just copying our methods, they're improving them, adapting them to local needs. This has become something bigger than we imagined. The morning sun painted their valley in shades of gold, highlighting the strength that had grown from their struggle. New businesses thriving under invisible protection, agricultural operations expanding with confidence, a community that had learned not just to defend itself, but to grow stronger through unity. It was never just about security, Derek observed, watching their legacy unfold. We showed people how to stand together, how to make their communities stronger without changing who they are. That's what makes this unstoppable. Because that was the real victory they'd harvested from their fight. Not just stopping one enemy, but showing rural Americans everywhere how to protect themselves while staying true to their values. Creating a legacy of strength that grew naturally from the very soil they defended. They thought threatening us would make us submit, Mike told his team, watching another day begin in their transformed valley. Instead, they helped us prove just how powerful communities become when they stand together. As morning customers arrived at River Creek Farm Stand, Mike smiled slightly. Some harvests, he knew, grew stronger with each passing season, and the seeds of protection they'd planted would keep rural America strong for generations to come.